This is part 2 of the chapter 2 overview. Whole chapter is important. We're going to focus on a few main points. So where we left off in the last video, talked about the concept of perfect reproduction. And so that where you can make an exact copy of something in the digital world. So there are several pages on that concept. Again, I introduced it in the last video. So that brings us to 34, page 34, the last section of what we see. And this is the concept of the metaphor. So metaphors here in technology are very similar to what they are in your English class, but is used in a general construct. So what we're doing here, I'm going to demonstrate with this desk in my office. All right, so I'm at my desk. And this is my desktop, and I keep things on my desktop that I can use to do my work. I have pens, I have paper clips, I have a Himalayan salt lamp, and a plate for my lunch. So this is my desktop, and all of my things are located here. If I want something not to be on the desktop anymore, I can move it out of the way. Can click on it and drag it, and it's no longer on my desktop. If I have something that I want to throw away, I can put it in the trash can. If I have something that I'm done with, but it may have some future purpose, I can put it in a recycle bin. So I can move things, I can drag them, and I can position things as I want them on my desktop. If something is small, I can stretch it and make it larger. Depending on what the thing is, check this out. If something is small, I can stretch it to make it larger. If something is too big, I can scrunch it to make it smaller. These are ways that we interact with the world around us already. So again, that concept of consistent user interface, making use of the world we already live in, making use of things that people already know, things that people already do, the ways that people already think of things, we can now use those same concepts to create interface design interfaces that are going to make it easy for people to do stuff. So, the metaphor then is applying some existing concept or construct to a metaphor that we're going to use. So first is that desktop metaphor. So the desktop metaphor then, page 34, is how the first graphical user interfaces were designed. Before the graphical user interface, there was just a command line interface. So this is the top of page 35 in this book, this graphic that just shows this is how DOS worked, this is how some versions of Unix worked early on, and there's actually still a command line in your software. It's only just most people don't use it very often. And you would just see just a blank screen with some text on it and a little blinking cursor. That little square there would just blink to tell you that it was waiting for you to enter some information. Command line interface. A line, you enter a command, and the computer follows that command. Transitioning to graphical user interfaces, a GUI, GUI, is where that began first with the desktop metaphor. So does it tell you? I don't remember where it tells you. There we go. So page 35 for all you MacBook folks. Apple did create the first personal computer with a graphical user interface. Apple had a desktop metaphor-based interface, and there were windows that you could open and position on that interface. Microsoft was second. There we go, a year and a half later. Microsoft introduced it. They called it Windows, and for many years, Microsoft was the dominant operating system for most personal computer users. Apple, through amazing marketing and amazing innovation, has, you know, kind of pushed ahead in certain areas, but Windows is still very much dominant. So so that's all interesting there. But the concept is they both then, with this GUI interface, began using a a desktop metaphor. So again, similar to what I demonstrated there. The trash versus recycle thing. There used to be, and in some applications you still have a trash. It says, it says trash. You can throw a folder into trash. But they switched to the name recycle bin at one point because you threw something in the trash, but it wasn't all the way gone. Okay, like if you throw something, you have a trash can that's just got like paper in it and you threw something away by mistake, you can pull that back out and it's okay. You throw something in a dumpster, you're probably not going back to get that, like, for anything. So the concept of a recycle bin gave you sort of more of an easier transition to trash. Like, it's trash, but you can still go back in and get it if you need to. It's not that kind of gross trash. So trash, recycle bin, again, things that we can throw away, maybe pull back if you accidentally threw it away too fast, versus something being finally, completely, totally gone. Incidentally, if you're going to have someone delete something and it's totally, completely, forever gone, you should probably give them some feedback that tells them that this is completely gone, because we still a lot of times have an expectation on our computer that we can grab something back out of the trash if we need to. So anyway, so that's that concept. So the desktop metaphor. The touch metaphor is more of what I showed with things that can be stretched, okay? Things that can be adjusted in size by our manipulation, okay? So with the touch metaphor that you see on most phones and tablets, and on some monitors or touchscreen, you walk up to a kiosk at a ATM machine or something else, there's usually a touch screen. So with a touch metaphor, we expect to be able to tap things to select them, to swipe things left or right, to move them out of our way. Like I knocked things off of my desk. That probably drove some of you crazy, actually. I'm going to pick it up, I promise. I was just trying to be dramatic. Anyway, so we think we can swipe things out of our way when we're done with them. And we can stretch things to make them bigger. We can pinch things to make them smaller. So chapter 2 closes with a discussion of those two metaphors, the desktop metaphor and the touch metaphor, which we then see applied through most of the hardware devices that we use today are following one of those two metaphors. Not all, because there are some devices that don't. And then there's sometimes where there's still, buttons and, not an actual GUI graphical user interface. Kind of like if you got a device that had a little panel, LCD panel on it or something that didn't, so there are other metaphors, but those are the main two that we see in computing, the desktop metaphor, the touch metaphor, and that is how we wrap up chapter 2 of our textbook. So, again, the whole concept is that when you're first creating a piece of software, when you're first creating a piece of hardware, you have to think through the people who are going to be using it and how you can make it as easy as possible for them to use your thing to do whatever it is they're trying to do. The more they like it, the easier it is for them to do what they need to do, the more likely they're going to keep being a customer, keep buying your product, and you'll be a profitable company. Again, when we look at it as consumers, as most of you will end up being based on your career choices, most of you will end up being consumers, making decisions about what you're going to use, and that, rather than creating technology from scratch. You're going to make those decisions largely based on how easy it is to use a thing, how effective the user interface is. Again, we have whole separate conversations we'll have on that throughout the course of the class. But you're more likely to get something that has an attractive interface that's easy to figure out how to use than something that maybe has more functionality but just is really, really confusing with a really steep learning curve. Out of the programs that I use in my work, in my business, my as an instructor, everything else, the programs that I use, sometimes I'm looking for ease of use, sometimes I'm looking for high functionality. You're never going to choose something if you've got two things that have pretty much, they do the same thing, the same features, same functionality. One of them is a lot easier to use than the other. You're pretty much going to go with the one that has a great user interface. If you pick something with a lesser interface, it's like, well, it's hard to use, but it does these extra 5 things that I really want, okay? But the products that we really love, the reason why like 90% of you have iPhones is because they have really done a great job at designing an interface. Even though they're not always consistent, taking us through these changes, still an excellent job of creating a strong user interface. People who are, if you're using a MacBook or an iMac versus a Windows computer, and then you suddenly switch, that's an interesting experiment, because for some people it's really hard to switch between because of the differences between the two interfaces. You know, the Finder versus the Explorer, they both show you all the files you've got, but they work differently, they're located differently. Things are different. When you touch something on the Mac, it kind of goes like this, and when you touch it on Windows, it jumps up like this. And so different things, you know, those two platforms, even though they're both GUI operating systems, they're designed a different way. They have different interfaces, and you have to get used to the new interface when you're using a different, you know, different device. So, point then of chapter 2 is to get you to think about user interfaces, to think about how you encounter a piece of software, and then to think about how the software developers, the software manufacturers, the hardware developers, how they have to think about us. They have to think about how we think, how we work, and they are most successful when they work in concert with what we are already expecting, with how we already think, with how we already work. So that's a good overview. So again, go through the whole chapter. There's another really good point about the volume buttons. You know, I hesitate to demonstrate it here because I'm like backwards as I'm looking, and so that's always a little confusing. But you know, if you think about like a volume button, we'll go up and down. That's easy. So if you think about volume, if you want something to be louder, then you're going to expect that to be an up button. Okay. If you want it to be quieter, you're going to expect it to be a down button. Because that makes sense. More sound, less sound. More volume, less volume. So, very simple example, but again, working with the way we think makes good sense. If you're using the colors green and red to show something, green means go, among other things. We'll talk about that in our web time. We talk about the psychology of color. But anyway, generally, as far as motion and action goes, green means go, red means stop. So, you're going to want to use those colors again with something that is going to make sense to your user, and you want to make sure that you have that you're giving feedback, you know, when it works. Now, or after you've finished the chapter, you know, now that you become familiar with these concepts, you know, pay attention to when you're using something and you're like, is it working? Is it working? Like, you're trying to figure out, there's like this awkward pause of wondering what's going on. By the way, there was nobody else in there. I was just demonstrating. I was by myself, talking to myself, asking for water, and I'm still thirsty. But anyway, so you want to start thinking through your life as a user of technology, because that, I promise you, is going to help you to be a better consumer, a better decision maker, bringing more value to your employer or your employees in the future when you are the one behind those technology decisions. All right, so that's chapter 2. Let me know how the videos are working for you, and if you like them, I will keep doing them. All right, talk to you later. Bye.